Back now with our continuing coverage of what the FBI is calling an apparent second assassination attempt on the life of former President Trump, this time at his own golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida. Back with me this hour, MSNBC law enforcement analyst and former police chief for DeKalb County, Georgia, Cedric Alexander. Also with us, former FBI supervisor Rob D'Amico. Rob, we are learning more about 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Ruth from his past social media activity. But from what we know, including what apparently was his saying that he wanted to fight and die in Ukraine, what's your take on who this guy is and what more do we need to know?
I think that just points to his ability to do risky behavior where he's not as concerned maybe for his life. He's trying to do things that speak to him, and he's willing to take challenges, and he carries them out. He went over there. He just had no experience. He was older, and then he tried to help in a different way. So he's definitely in that commitment to do things, and I think that points it out here. I think him having the vest and not having it on yet probably interrupted. He was probably doing something in preparation that he thought was going to end up maybe in a firefight. That's why he'd have the vest on. And it was interrupted. So I think he definitely has the capability to do dangerous things, and it's shown.
Yeah, what do you make of some of the other things that were found around him? We know there was the rifle with a scope. Well, let me just stop there, okay? Because we heard a couple of different things at the press briefing. Somewhere between, they estimate, 300 to 500 yards from the president. That's where he had hidden in the bushes, and that's where he was seen. Tell us about the scope, tell us about the gun, and tell us about the other things that were found at the scene.
So I think he was actually waiting for President Trump to get closer. My view is he put the stuff there. He's probably going to put the vest on. And anytime that you use a scope or an optic on a rifle, your field of vision goes down. So he probably was putting it through the fence, taking a look at maybe what was the best place that he'd be able to have a shot. He loses peripheral vision and probably didn't see the Secret Service agent walking up on him. But I think he was preparing for it. And the fact that I've heard now it was an AK-47, which is a bit different than an AR-15, still very deadly, not as accurate, but the round is flatter and it's actually heavier and can do more damage because it's a 7.62 as opposed to a smaller, faster round of AR-15. But it's still just as deadly. So there's definitely a lot that was going into it. I think it was going to be, he was waiting for him to get closer. And then that Secret Service, he probably wasn't prepared for the Secret Service agent to be walking a hole ahead, looking in the tree line. And then he saw his barrel sticking out, which as a sniper, that's a bad tactic because just for that reason, a barrel sticking out of bushes or a window can be seen as abnormal instead of behind it. So the Secret Service agent did the right thing. He fired. It might not have been an accurate shot, but he stopped that person because he didn't know exactly what he was looking at through that scope.
Cedric, we mentioned at the top of the show that there are at least a dozen police cars around Mar-a-Lago. So this happened about a 10-minute drive from where the president lives and where he is now. And security, obviously, very heightened. Secret Service, a protocol, the security there, very heightened. So what is the role of local police now? Are they involved in the investigation, or is their job right now, given that the former president is still within that jurisdiction, to help with security?
Well, this investigation is probably going to belong to the FBI, and certainly local police will be there to provide any additional support that is needed. And local police, local sheriff's office, and including neighboring counties, and they're in West Palm County as well, they're going to be very supportive of each other and making sure that the federal agencies that may be in charge of this investigation has all the information, data, video footage, witness statements, whatever. They will assist in this investigation, but will probably be secondary to the investigation, where your federal agency, I would suspect FBI, will probably have the primary charge of this investigation.
Can we talk a little bit, too, about the technology? And you and I were talking about this earlier, but just the idea that somebody could write down what they saw, write down a plate number. Next thing you know, it goes into the system. And really extraordinarily quickly, technology can pinpoint where he was. It's hard to imagine, isn't it, Cedric, how they might have caught up with him so quickly if not for this type of technology. And how widespread is it? Is it just lucky that they had it?
Well, this is the importance to having a community that's engaged, that's aware, people who are paying attention to their environment. And this person has the wherewithal to write down a tag number that appeared suspicious. It'd be interesting to know a little bit more about that. And we will, I think, over the next day or so. But that information, yes, it's sent into a database. It comes back. They're able to pinpoint that vehicle where it not only is at that particular moment when they locate it, but where it had been in the past. So that type of technology, along with, I think, drone technology, which we had talked about in the last session here, block here, around the importance of the utilization of technology as we continue with these threats. Because this is the second threat of a former president over the last 8 weeks. And we have to take every precaution to make sure that our presidential candidates and anyone else who are involved in politics in this nation, particularly at that level, are protected. And we have to utilize all the personnel power that we have, but we also have to integrate technology, some that we know about and others that are still other technologies out there as well, too, that very well may be helpful to supplant some of those differences, because your agencies are going to be stretched. And I guarantee you, going forward, you're going to see much more security in and around these presidential candidates and beyond. And that is certainly going to take a lot of personnel and resources. But intelligence gathering, intelligence information, support from the community, which is going to be hugely important, I think, in this case, resolving itself tonight to be able to identify a person. So American citizens every day play a very important role in this as well, too.
Yeah, it's a good reminder, isn't it? You know, Rob, I wonder, all the information that they have so far, they gave us some of it at the press conference, but of course, as you well know, they have a lot more information, and they've gathered a lot more just since that press conference took place. How do they use that as they approach this suspect and try to get him to talk?
Well, I think it's a matter of if he even talks. He's probably going to get a lawyer and going to look at it that way. But everything they're going to get as the search warrants come in for his phones, his emails, his laptop, anything else they get, they're going to put it in the hands of very seasoned and interviewers, and they're going to talk to him. They're going to try to find out what was behind this and what his motives were. Did he have help? Did he talk to anyone? The Secret Service is going to be looking at it as, was there something that he did that they could have predicted this or seen that it was an issue if he wasn't on the radar? So everyone's kind of looking at it, but you get some seasoned and interviewers in there that are going to talk to him, and they're going to sit down with him. And, it's not going to be adversarial. They're going to just try to get information from him if he, in fact, talks at all.
Rob D'Amico and Cedric Alexander, gentlemen, thank you so much.